To hear more stories like these, hit subscribe, personalized. We are reading through an excerpt of the Book of Lost Tales, Part 1 by J.R.R. Tolkien, but gathered and put in this book by his son Christopher Tolkien as part of the history of Middle-earth. Now, the Book of Lost Tales was started in 1916, and it was left incomplete. The reason it's important is that it's a foundation of Middle-earth mythology. It lays the groundwork for key stories and characters. It's the exploration of early themes. Tolkien reveals his initial ideas on the themes in his future work of Lord of the Rings, like mortality, fate, and the relationship between elves and men. This is part of left of his early development of Tolkien's constructed languages. And it just basically gives an insight to the creative processes. This book, at least there's 2 volumes. The first part contains the tales of Valinor. And I will be reading a story called The Music of the Immerse. Here's the introduction to this story. The original, hastily penciled and much amended draft text of The Music of the Immerse is still extant on loose sheets placed inside the cover of the notebook that contains a fuller and much more finished text written in ink. This second version was, however, closely based on the first and changed it chiefly by additions. The text given here is the second, but some passages where the 2 differ notably are annotated. So Christopher Tolkien is when he talks about putting this book together, he's very transparent in discussing what it was, how he put it together. I think just out of loyalty to wanting to do honor to his father's work and explaining to us what's going on. Rummel says, and I will be paraphrasing some things because this isn't a very wordy, if you think about language from 1916, it's very wordy. So some words I'll be simplifying. So I will speak the first paragraph because I too want to be true to Tolkien's work, even as well as not break copyright law. I will read the first paragraph as is, and then I will interpret the rest so you can hear a contrast. Hear now things that have not been heard among men, and the elves speak seldom of them. Yet did Manwe Sulamo, lord of the elves and men, whisper them to the fathers of my father in the deeps of time. Behold, Iluvatar dwelt alone. Before all things he sang into being the Ainur first, and greatest is their power and glory of all his creatures within the world and without. Thereafter he fashioned them dwellings in the void, and dwelt among them, teaching them all manner of things, and the greatest of these was music. Okay, now he would speak, propounding to them themes of song and joyous hymn, revealing many of the great and wonderful things he devised in his mind and heart. And then they would make music before him, and the voices of their instruments would rise in splendor about his throne. Upon a time, Iluvatar propounded a mighty design of his heart to the Ainur, unfolding a history whose vastness and majesty had never been equaled by anything he'd come up with before, and the glory of its beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur, so that they bowed before Iluvatar and were speechless. Then, said Iluvatar, the story that I have laid before you, and that great region of beauty I've described unto you as the place where all history might be unfolded, is related as if it were an outline. I've not filled all the empty spaces, neither have I recounted to you all the adornments and things of loveliness and delicacy in my mind. It's my desire you make a great and glorious music and singing of this, because I've taught you much and set brightly the secret fire within you. You exercise your minds and powers in adorning that theme to your own thoughts. But I will sit and pay attention, and I'll be glad that through you I've made much beauty with this song. So then the harpists and the lutenists, the flautists and the pipers, the organs and the countless choirs of the Ainur began to fashion the theme of the Iluvatar into music, and a sound arose of mighty melodies, changing and interchanging, mingling and dissolving amid the thunder of harmonies greater than the roar of the great seas, till the places of the dwelling of Iluvatar and the regions of the Ainur were so overflowing with music, and the very echo of that music, and then echoes, 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 flowed even into faraway, dark, and empty spaces. There was never before, nor has there been ever since, music of such vastness of splendor. Though it's said, a mightier farce shall be woven before the seat of Iluvatar by the choirs of both Ainur and the sons of men after the great end. Then Ainur and men will know his mind and heart, as well as he may be in all his intent. Now Iluvatar sat and paid attention, and for a great while it seemed really great to him. There were very few flaws in the music, and to him it seemed that the Ainur had learned much and well. But as the great theme progressed, it came into the heart of Melko to interweave matters of his own vain imagining that were not fitting in with the theme of Iluvatar. Now Melko had among the Ainur been given some of the greatest gifts of power and wisdom and knowledge by Iluvatar, and he fared often alone into the dark places and voids, seeking the secret fire that give it life and reality. He had a very hot desire to bring things into being on his own, but he couldn't find that secret fire because it dwelt with Iluvatar, and that Morgoth didn't realize that till later. So Morgoth began thinking deep, cunning thoughts, which he did not even show to Iluvatar or tell anyone. Some of these devisings and imaginings he now wove into his music. And straightway harshness and discordancy rose above him, and many of those that played near him grew despondent, and their music became feeble as a result, and their thoughts unfinished and unclear, and others fell to attuning their music to Melko's instead of the great theme which they were all supposed to be doing. In this way, basically, Melko's a big troublemaker, and he darkened the music. For those thoughts of his came from the outer blackness, where Iluvatar had not yet turned the light of his face, and because Melko's secret thoughts was set apart from the beauty of Iluvatar's design, its harmonies were broken and destroyed. Iluvatar sat and listened. He paid attention until the music reached a depth of gloom and ugliness unimaginable. Then he smiled sadly and raised his left hand, and immediately, though no one knew how, a new theme began among the clash, like and yet unlike the first, and it gathered power and sweetness. But the discord and noise that Melko had aroused started into an uproar against it, and there was a war of sounds, and a clanging arose in which no sound could be distinguished. Then Iluvatar raised his right hand, and he no longer smiled, but he wept. And behold, a third theme, and it wasn't in any way like the others. It grew amid the turmoil, till at last it seemed as if there were two musics progressing at one time about the feet of the Iluvatar, and these were utterly at variance. One was very great and deep and beautiful, but it was mingled with an unquenchable sorrow, while the other was now grown to unity in a system of its own. But it was loud and vain and arrogant, braying triumphantly against the other as it thought to drown it. But it essayed to clash more fearsomely, finding itself but in some manner harmonizing with its rival. At the center of this echoing struggle, the halls of Iluvatar shook, and a tremor ran through the dark places. Iluvatar raised up both his hands, and in one unfathomed chord, deeper than the firmament, more glorious than the sun, and piercing as the Iluvatar's glance, that music crashed and ceased. Iluvatar said, "Mighty are the Ainur and glorious, and among them is Melko, the most powerful in knowledge. But that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that have yet to be sung and played, I have caused them to be not in the musics that you make in the heavenly regions, but rather to have shape and reality, even if as we have. And you're who I made to share in the reality of myself. Maybe I shall love these things that come of my song, even as I love the Ainur who are my thought. Melko may see that no theme can be played unless it comes in the end of Iluvatar's self, nor can any alter the music. He that attempts this finds himself in the end, but aiding me in devising a thing of still greater grandeur and more complex wonder." Basically, he's saying anything that you do to mess up my music, I will take it and I will incorporate it into my design, and I will incorporate it in such a way that it will become greater. It's like if you build something or you draw something, or you create something. So in art, many times when an artist makes a mistake, they're able to incorporate that into their work, and it gives the painting even a greater style or effect. When someone builds something and something happens and it ruins it, or say you build a table, the table falls down, it is that very thing that you take and incorporating more strength into it, the second table is even better. So that's what he's saying here. Melko have terror. Though Melko has terror as fire, and sorrow like dark waters, wrath like thunder, and eagle is far from my light, as the depths of the uttermost of the dark places. Come into the design I laid before you. So remember, Melko is like Sauron. but 15 million times as dark, because he's a immortal being. Through him has pain and misery been made in the clash of overwhelming music. With confusion of sound have cruelty and darkness, foul mists and violent flame, cold without mercy, been born, and death without hope. Yet is this through him and not for him, and he shall see even those beings which now dwell among his evil and endure Melko, misery and sorrow, terror and weakness, declare in the end, it will only redound it to my great glory. Life more worth the living, and the world so much the more wonderful and marvelous, that all of the deeds of Ilúvatar shall be called his mightiest and his loveliest. So you must remember here that Tolkien he's a great studier and learner of legends, and so he wanted, the purpose of writing was to give England its own lore like the Norse countries had. So that's why here you have this sort of creation story. The Ainur then feared and comprehended not all that was said, and Melko was filled with shame and the anger of shame. But Ilúvatar, seeing their amaze, arose in glory and went forth from his dwellings, past those fair regions he had fashioned for the Ainur, out into the dark places, and he bade the Ainur follow him. Now, when they reached the midmost void, they beheld a sight of surpassing beauty and wonder, where there had been emptiness. Ilúvatar said, behold your singing and your music. Even as you played of my will, your music took shape, and as the world unfolds and its history begins, so did my theme in your hands. So you will find the design that is mine, and the adornments and embellishments he himself devised. Nay, even Melko will discover those things which he thought to contrive of his own heart, out of harmony with my mind, and he will find them but a part of the whole to his glory. One thing only have I added, and tributary to its glory, not to Melko's glory. One thing Ilúvatar added was the fire that giveth life and reality, and behold, the secret fire burnt at the heart of the world. The Ainur marveled to see how the world was globed amid the void, and yet separated from it. And they rejoiced to see light, and found it was both white and golden. And they laughed because of the colors, and because of the great roaring of the ocean. They were filled with longing. Their hearts were glad because of the air and the wind, and all that earth was made of. There lived still in water a deeper echo of the music of the Ainur than any substance else in the world. And at this latest day, many of the sons of men will hearken to the voice of the sea, and long for they know not what. Know then that water was for the most part the dream and invention of Olmo, and Anu, whom Ilúvatar had instructed deeper than all of the others in the depths of music. The air and winds and ethers had Manwe Sulmo devised, greatest and most noble of the Ainur. The earth and the most of its goodly substances did all contrive, and Ilúvatar taught him many things of wisdom, barely less than Melko. Yet there was much that was not his. Now Ilúvatar talked to Olmo and said, do you not see how Melko thought of biting cold without moderation, but has not destroyed the beauty of the crystal waters, nor the stale pools, even where he thought to conquer completely. Snow has been made, and frost has wrought his exquisite works. Ice has reared his castles in grandeur. Melko devised undue heat, fires without restraint, but not dried up his desire, your desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the seas. Behold, see now the height and glory of the clouds and the magic that dwells in the mist and vapors. Listen to the whisper of the rains. Almost said, yes, truly, water is fairer now than it was my best devising before. Snow is way prettier than I could have imagined. If there's little music therein, rain is beautiful indeed and has a music of its own that fills my heart. I'm so glad I've heard it, though that sadness is among the saddest of all things. I'm going to go find Sulamo of the air and the winds, and he and I will play melodies forever and ever. So they're going to get together and rock out with nature. So even when Iluvatar was speaking to Ulmo, the Ainur beheld, they're watching how the world unfolded and the history that Iluvatar had made with the music. It is on their gathered memories of the speech of Iluvatar, and the knowledge, incomplete as it may be, each has their own music. So the Ainur gazed until long before the coming of men. Nay, who does not know that it was countless ages before even the Eldar arose and sang their first song and made the first of all the gems, and were seen by both Iluvatar and the Ainur to be of exceptional beauty. There grew a contention among them. So enamored did they become of the glory of the world as they gazed upon it, and so enthralled by the history. Now this was the end. Some abode still with Iluvatar beyond the world, and these were mostly those who had been engrossed in their playing with the thoughts of Iluvatar's plan and design, and they only wanted to set forth without any ideas of their own. But some others, and among them were many of the most beautiful and wise of the Ainur, they wanted to leave Iluvatar to dwell in the world, for they said, we would guard these fair things of our dreams, which by your power have attained to reality and surpassing beauty, and we will instruct both Eldar and men in their wonder and uses. So when the time comes, when they appear on earth by your purpose, first the Eldar, and at length the fathers and the fathers of men. Melko pretended that he desired to control the violence of the heat and turmoil that he had set upon the earth. But the truth was, deep in his heart, he wanted to take over and make war upon Eldar and men, because he was jealous because Iluvatar had purposed to give men and the Eldars great gifts, and he's basically jealous. Now Eldar and men were of Iluvatar's devising. They did not totally comprehend when they were first made, or I guess sung or musicked into being. And none of the Ainur dared to add any of their music to the creation of men and Eldar. And these races, for that very reason, are named the children of Iluvatar. This maybe is the cause why many others of the Ainur, besides Melko, have wanted to meddle with both elves and men, with good or evil intent. The elder were most like in nature, if not in power and stature, to the Ainur. Men he gave strange gifts, and their dealings have been chiefly with the elves. Knowing all their hearts, Iluvatar still granted the desire of the Ainur. Nor is it said that he was grieved. So entered these ones into the world, and they are the ones whom we call the Valar. So the Valar are the Ainur who left Iluvatar to enter the world that Iluvatar and the Ainur created. They dwelt in Valinor, and some on earth or in depths of the sea. There Melko ruled both fires and the cruelest frost, both the uttermost cold and the hottest heats. And whatever was violent or excessive, sudden or cruel in the world is laid to his charge, and for the most part with justice. But Olmo dwells in the outer ocean and controls the flowing of all waters and the courses of rivers, the replenishment of springs, and the distilling of rains and dews throughout the world. At the bottom of the sea he bethinks him of music, deep and strange, yet full of sorrow. And therein he has aid from Manwe Sulamo. The Solosimpi, what time the elves came and dwelt in Kor, learnt much of him. Whence, when they came in the allurement of their piping and their love to dwell by the shore, Salmor there was with him an Osei and Onin, which he gave control the waves and lesser seas. Alle dwelt in Valinor, and he fashioned many things, tools and instruments. And he was very busy in the making of webs, as in the beating of metals. Tillage and husbandry was his delight, as much as tongues and the alphabets, embroideries, painting. The Noldoli, who were the sages of the Eldar, and thirsted ever after new lore and knowledge, they learned countless crafts and magics and sciences. From his teaching, whereto the elder brought ever their own great beauty of mind and heart and ideas, they did attain invention and making of gems, and these were not in the world before the Eldar. And the finest of all the gems were the Cimmerels, and they are lost. The greatest and chief of these four great ones, Manwe Sulamo, he dwelt in Valinor. And he sat on a glorious throne at the top of a pinnacle that towers way up upon the world's edge. Hawks flew ever to and fro, and their eyes could see to the deeps of the sea or penetrate the most hidden caverns and darkness of the world. The hawks brought him news from everywhere of everything, and little escaped him. Yet did some matters lie hid even from him. With him was Varda, the beautiful, and she became his spouse and his queen of the stars. And their children, above them was a bunch of fair spirits, and men love Manwe more than Olmo, 'cause he's never done anything bad to them. Nor is he jealous of them. The Teleri, whom Inwe ruled, were especially beloved of him. Manwe was clad in sapphires, ruler of airs and wind, and he's held lord of gods and elves and men, and the greatest obstacle against the evil of Melko. After the departure of these Ainur and their vesselage, all was quiet for a great age, while the Iluvatar watched. All of a sudden he said, "Behold, I love the world. It's a hall of play for Eldar and men who are also my beloved. But when the Eldar come, they'll be the fairest, most lovely of all things, and deeper in the knowledge of beauty and happier than men. So to men I will give a new gift and a greater." So he devised that men will have a free virtue where, within the limits of the powers and substances and chances of the world, they might fashion and design their life even beyond the original music of the Aenir. He did that of their operations. Everything should be in shape, indeed completed, and the world fulfilled into last and smallest. Even we Eldar have found to our sorrow that men have a strange power for good or ill, and for turning things despite gods and fairies to their mood in the world, so that we say, "Fate may not conquer the children of men, but yet are they strangely blind, whereas their joy should be great." Now Iluvatar knew that men, set amid the turmoils of the Aenir, would not be ever of a mind to use the gift in harmony with his intent. Basically, men are going to do their own thing. But he said they will find out in time that whatever they've done, even the ugliest of deeds or works, will work for my glory. The thought of man is at times a grief even to the Iluvatar, whereas giving that gift of freedom was their envy and amazement. And the patience of Iluvatar at its misuse is a matter of the greatest marveling to both gods and fairies. Now, I'm not sure what fairies became, or if he just decided, since there's no fairies in the canon Lord of the Rings that we know. So, okay. So then there's lots of commentary and notes about this story. And now we'll talk about the coming of the Valar and the building of Valinor. So he does talk about the notes and stuff. And now this person, Ariel, on the lonely island, says, These tidings, this news is very new and strange, but it seems that most of what you've told happened outside this world, whereas I know now where it comes from life and motion and the ultimate devising of its history. I still like to hear the earliest deeds that's within this world's borders. Of the Valor's labors, for example, and the great beings of the ancient days. So, are the sun or the moon or the stars, and how did that happen? What about the continents of the earth, the outer lands, the great seas, and the magic isles? Even of the Eldar and their rising of the coming of men, I would like to hear more of your tales of wisdom and wonder. So Romeo said, your questions are basically as nigh, as long as wordy as my tales. The thirst of your curiosity would dry a well. You know not what you ask, nor how long and complicated these stories are. The sun is well above the houses, and this is no hour a day for the telling of tales. It's time to eat. So, darn it. So Ariel just sat there thinking about what he had heard and letting it sink in. Little Heart came, and another bearing covers and fair linen, and they say to him, and another being, it's the words of Rumel the sage that you are fainting in the arbor of the thrushes for hunger and for weariness of his girlless tongue, and thinking that very like to be, we are coming to aid thee. So Ariel thanked him, ate, and spent the rest of that day hidden in the quiet alleys of the garden, deep in thought. For although it seemed enclosed within great stone walls covered with fruit trees or with climbing plants, where golden red blossoms shone beneath the sun, yet were the nooks and the corners of the garden, its coppices and lawns, its shady ways and flowering fields, without end and exploration, discovered always something new, even greater. He was so happy, even when that night the toast was drunk to the rekindling of the magic sun, the candles held aloft, and the throng went more to the room where the tale fire burnt. So then they're talking about telling tales again with Lindo. Behold, Manme, Sulamo, and Varda, the beautiful, arose. Varda it was who was at the playing of the music, had thought much of the light that was of white, silver, and stars. Those twains gathered now wings of power to themselves and went swiftly through the air. Vaeta is that which is wrapped dark and sluggish above the world and without it, but Ilwe is blue and clear and flows among the stars. And at last they came to Vilna that is gray, and therein may the birds fly safely. With them came the Blessed Valley and added their music to theirs. Now swiftly as they fared, Melko was there before them, having rushed headlong, flaming through the airs in the impetuosity of his speed. The sea was tumultuous where he dived, and the mountains, basically, they became volcanoes. Thereafter came Olmo, and Ole. There was no one with Olmo except for Salmar, who was known later as Noldorin. For good through the heart of that mighty one, he ever thought deep thoughts alone. It was silent and aloof and haughty. With Ale was that great lady Palurian, whose delights were richness and fruits of the earth. And that's why she's been called Yavanna among the Eldar. Then there was a great host who are the sprites and trees and woods, dales, forests, and mountains, or those who sing amid the grass at morning and chant among the corn at evening. Then there are Nurmur, Tavari, Nindani, Narosi, Brownies, Fays, Pixies, Leprons. I'm not sure what a Lepron is. And what else are they not called, for their number is great. But they must not be confused with the Eldar. They were born before the world. They are older than its oldest. And they're not of it, but they laugh at it much. For had they not someone to do with this making, so that, for the most part, it's a play for them. The Eldar of the world, and love it with a great and burning love. Now behind those great chieftains, one of the waves of the sea and his consort, and then there's troops and the long trussed Wingildi, and these are the spirits of the foam and surfs of the ocean. There was a vassal. Ose was a vassal and subordinate to Olmo, out of fear and reverence, but not love. Then there were other ones, one of which who is Lorien, Olafentur, and the Fentura's death. And they are ladies of great worships, queens of the Valar. So I'm not going to say each and every person because, one, I don't know how to say all these words, and two, they're not vital to the story. Okay. The other was the spouse of Orme the hunter named Aldron, who shouts for joy among mountaintops, and is nigh as lusty of that perpetual youth Tolkis. Okay, so this is where he's practicing the descendants in the history like the Norse did for their history. With all these, even when all these had crossed the confines of the world, there still came hurrying late Makar and his sister Messe, and it had been better had they not found the world, but remained forever the Ainur beyond Vita in the stars, because both were spirits who liked to quarrel. And with some of the lesser ones now with them, they've been first to join in the discords of Melko and aid in the spreading of his music. So all these great spirits were gathered together within the confines of the world. Manwë spoke to them, told them how the Valar should live in this place or be happy and rejoice in its goodness. If Melko be suffered to destroy it, make fire and turmoil, so that we don't have anywhere to be in peace, or the earth blossom, or the designs of Iluvatar come to being. So all the Valar were really mad at Melko because he wanted to destroy the world of Middle Earth, and the rest chose the certain of their number to seek out the wrongdoer. Those two sought him out and constrained him to come before Manwë. So they basically went and caught him. Tokasu's heart misliked the crooked guild of Melko, so he basically hit him really hard. And Melko put up with that, but he did not forget it. And Melko spoke with the gods and said he didn't mean any harm. He only was reveling in the newness of the world. He would never seek to do anything against Manwë or any of the chiefs, nor hurt anyone. So then the Valar decided it was Melkor thinks. Melkor's basically saying each of the Valar should leave and live where the place that he loved him on earth, amid the things that he loved upon the Middle Earth. But they should not seek to extend his sway beyond boundaries. So basically, to find the part of Middle Earth that they loved and stay there, but they didn't get to go anywhere else. In this, there was some reflection, but one of the gods took his words in faith and would use his advice, but the others did not trust Melkor. Olmo arose and went to the outermost seas that were set beyond the outer lands, because he did not like high words or discussion of folks. He didn't want to talk about anymore. He'd rather just be left alone in the deep waters and leave the governance of the great and lesser seas to a couple of his people in command. Yet ever of his magic deep in his outermost sea halls of Olmonian, he controlled the faint stirrings of the shadowy seas and ruled the lake and springs and rivers of the world. So this was the manner of the earth in those days, and it hasn't changed since of the labors of the Valar of old. Mightiest of the regions are the great lands where men dwell and wander now, and the lost elves sing and dance in the hills. But beyond the westernmost limits lies great seas, and in that vast water of the west are many smaller lands and isles. So basically then there's the shadowy seas, the Twilight Islands, the Tower of Pearl rises pale upon the western cape. So that is explaining parts of his map. Let's talk about the Twilight Isles are reckoned the first of the outer lands. And then it's going to talk about who rules them. Beyond Ahriman stands the mountains of Valinor in a great ring. And there are snowy mountains. As yet the sun is not risen, and the mountains of Valinor had not been raised, and the vale of Valinor lay wide and cold. Beyond Valinor I have never seen or heard, save that of a surety there's dark waters in the outer seas. They don't have any tides. They're very cool and very thin. No boat can sail upon them. Except for Olmo, enchanted fish, and Olmo also has a magic car. So the gods, Melko leaves, and the gods hold council. There were a couple gods, Ale and his wife. They were the most upset by Melko's problems and did not trust his promises, because he basically told them he wasn't going to do anything anymore that was bad or dark, and that the gods should not become, they were like, look, we should not separate the way he wants us to and go to different parts, because he might decide to attack them singly or to hurt their possessions. So basically they're saying he wants us to separate because then it's easier for him to conquer us. He is more powerful, Melko's more powerful than any of the other ones except for Manwë. Rather, let us build a dwelling where we may abide and enjoy together, faring only at the need to the care and survey of our goods and land. There even such as be of other mind may dwell at times and find rest and pleasance after labors. So Ale already wanted to be making things, and he pushed more for that. And to most of the gods, it seemed good advice. So they went around the world looking for places to live. So basically what Melko said, they decided, yeah, I want to go find the place I like the best and do what I want. And so Ale wanted to make stuff. He wanted to find a place to make stuff. Those are the days of the gloaming. For light there was silver and golden, but it was not gathered. So basically there was no sun. But it was not gathered together, but it flowed and quivered in uneven streams about the airs, or at times fell gently to the earth in glittering rain and ran like water on the ground. And at that time Varda in her plane had just put a few stars in the skies. So in this dimness, the gods stalked north and south, and they couldn't see very much, because the deepest of these regions, there was cold and solitude, because Melko ruled those areas before anybody else could get there. And he fashioned his own halls, and he made a fortress, and he had servants. He had already started fortifying himself. Now, because of the darkness, Ale persuaded Melko to build 2 towers to the north and south, for he wanted to set lamps on each one. These Ale made the towers of gold and silver, and the pillars were raised by Melko and were very tall, and they shone like pale blue crystal. When Ale hit them with his hand, they rang like metal. They sprang up through the lower air, even to the stars. And Melko said they were of an imperishable substance of great strength that he devised, and he lied because he knew they were of ice. The one of the north he gave a name to each. The lamps were made ready and set upon them. They were filled with gathered light, silver to the north and golden to the south. The light Manwë and Varda gathered lavishly from the sky. So that way the gods could see and explore the world and choose the fairest land that they wanted for their home. Now that they had light, they went east and west. East was tumbled lands, and west was seas of darkness. The lamps to the north and south flickered and fell. As they fell, the waters rose above the isles. They didn't understand why, but the blaze of these lights had melted the ice of the pillars of Melko, right? And that made the water flood into the shadowy sea. So great was their thaw that the seas were not at first very big, but they got massive. Then there was the time of the first night, and it was very long. But the Valar were really mad at Melko's treachery, and they were about to be overwhelmed in the shadowy seas that rose and covered the islands which they were basically living in. So I'll say he was the guy in charge of the seas. He was under Almo. He got all gathered to him and put forth their might. They dragged the island whereon stood the Valar westward from the waters till they came to Eärmon, whose high shores held the angry flood, and that was the first tide. So they basically made the waters gather to uncover the land so they could live on the land. Manwë said, now we'll make a dwelling fast as a bulwark or as a opposition against evil. They saw a wide open space. They reached way beyond the outer seas, and that would be a place well suited to a great building and fashioning of realms of delight, where the Valar and their folk first gathered, and they got all these rocks and stones, and they made huge mountains between it, and that plain became Valinor, or land of the gods. So Valinor, it basically is the land of the gods. And Ole, indeed it was himself who labored for 7 ages at Manwë's bidding in the piling. The world rumbled in the gloom, and Melko heard the noises of their labor. By reason of their great masonry. Now Eärmoni is very broad and bare at a marvelous level because they removed all the stone and rock that was there. The mountains of Valinor are rugged and at an impregnable height, like you cannot cross them. Seen at length, these towered mightily between Valinor and the world. The gods drew breath. But Ole and Tolkien fared abroad with many of the folk, and brought back all the might of marbles and good stones, of iron and silver and bronze, and they heaped amid the plain, and then they started building from those. That's why the Elven or the Valar seems otherworldly, because it kind of is, because they wanted to make sure Melko couldn't get there. It's ill working in this gloom, because now they're working in gloom because the lamps the guy made, he didn't know were made of ice, and they melted. So now it's gloomy again. 'Twas an evil deed of Melko's that brought to ruin those fair lamps. Varda said, well, there's still light in the air that flows and lights the earth. And she wanted to gather that light and set a beacon. But Manwë did not want to have any more light taken from heaven, because the dark was already that of night. So he asked Olmo to draw rivers of light into vessels and pour back waters into their place. So basically they took the light from the water and put them in cauldrons that Ole fashioned. Again, Ole was like the smith, right? Fashioned in the gloom against his return. And they named those as well. So they named the cauldrons. Now in the midmost vale, they dug pits. They were massive pits, leagues deep, beside the vastness of the plain. And they set 7 rocks of gold that were brought up from the sea. And then a fragment was cast of the lamp. And then the pit was covered with earth. And Vanna, who loved sunlight, and she made flowers open. and the murmur of her maidens round her was like to the merry noise of folk that stir abroad for the first time on a bright morning. So she sang the song of spring among the mound, and danced about it, and watered it with the great streams of the golden light from the spilled lakes. In the other pit they cast 3 huge pearls that were found in the great sea, and a small star from Varda, and they covered it with foam and white mists, and sprinkled lightly earth on it. Lorien loved twilight and shadow, and scents that the evening winds brought. And Lorien is the lord of dreams and imaginings. So he whispered noiseless words while his sprites played quiet tunes next to him, like music stealing out into the dark from distant dwellings. And the gods poured upon that place rivers of white radiance and silver light. So those were full. Then came Kimi, the Earth Lady, the wife of Alai, mother of the Lord of Forests, and she wove spells above those 2 places, deep enchantments of life and growth, and putting forth a fading into her song. Then she brooded for a while, and the Valar sat in a circle, and after a time there came a bright gleam of gold among the gloom, and a cry of joy and praise was set up by the Valar and all their companies. Then, from that place that had been watered, rose a slender shoot, and from its bark pale gold effulgence poured. Yet did that plant grow so that in 7 hours there was a tree. The Valar and the folk could sit in its branches. It was a massive tree, and there was nothing that could break it. It glowed faintly with the yellow light. So its fair boughs were thrust in all directions, and it budded golden bloods. And then there were rich green leaves with shiny edges. The light that the tree gave was white and fair. As the Valar watched it put forth blossom in massive, massive amounts so that you couldn't even see the branches. All you saw was gold flowers, and the light spilled from those tips and splashed upon the ground. Everybody was happy. The gods were praising the people who created it. It was 12 hours since that tree sprouted, and then that tree sprouted, and then at that hour did a glint of silver pierce the yellow blaze. And then they saw another shoot where the pools had been poured, and it had bark that was white like pearls, and it grew just as fast as the other tree did. Its blossoms shone less. It glowed. It glowed. The other waxed now to a stature as lofty as Lorien, so it was really, really tall. It had a slender trunk. It was more shapely. Its bark was more like silk. Its boughs were thicker and more tangled, and its leaves were bluish green, shaped like spearheads. So they were all watching, and Palurian said, "It hasn't stopped growing yet." And as she spoke, it blossomed. And those flowers did not hang in clusters, but they were separate on fine stems, and they were silver and pearls and glittering stars and burnt with a white light. So basically moon, right? They're like moon blossoms. And it seemed as if the tree's heart was throbbing, and it was very radiant and waxing and waning. Light like liquid silver distilled from its bowl and dripped to earth from its trunk, and it shed a very great illumination above the plain, but it wasn't as wide as a tree of gold. And there was a continual flutter of shadows among its brightness. Everyone was amazed, and they named the tree, "Then gather ye now all the light that drips in liquid shape from this fair tree, and store it, and let it fare thence but very sparingly. Behold, this tree, when the 12 hours of its fullest light are past, will wane again, and Lorelyn will blaze forth once more." So the moon tree will wane, and then the other tree will blaze. And they will go back and forth. Light is the sap of these trees, and their sap is light. She also said they had to be watered with light to have sap and live. Yet of their growth and being did they ever make light in great abundance, over and beyond that which their roots drank in. But the gods did as she said, and they continued to water the trees with light. Because of the bright trees, Alle light. Alle now had light to make stuff, right? So he set about many tasks. First, he made a abode for Manwë and a watchtower. Then he sped his hawks and received them on his return. Thence did he speed his darting hawks and receive them on his return, and thither fared often in later days Sorentur, king of eagles, whom Manwë gave much might and wisdom. So the king of eagles, Manwë gave might and wisdom too. The house was made of white marbles and blue, and stood in the snow. And the roof was made of web of that blue air that's above the white and the gray. So their roof was spangled with stars, and that's where Manwë lived. And then in the plain, in the full radiance of the trees, were a cluster of dwellings built like a fair town, and that town was named Valinor. There was no metal or stone or any wood of the trees that was spared to raising them, that was spared to the raising of the town. Their roofs were of gold, their floors were silver, their doors of the buildings were polished bronze. They were lifted with spells, and their stones were bound with magic. Separate from these, and bordering upon the open vale, was a great court, and this was Alle's house. It was filled with magic webs, woven of the light of Lorelyn, and the sheen of Silpian, and the glint of the stars. But other dwellings were made of thread, of gold and silver, and iron and bronze, beaten to the thinness of a spider's filament, and all were woven with beauty to stories of the music of the Ainur, picturing those things that were and shall be, or such as have only been in the glory of the mind of Iluvatar. In the court were some of all the trees that grew upon the earth, and there was a pool of blue water with them. The fruits fell throughout the day, thudding richly to the earth upon the grass of its margin. And Palurans gathered the fruit so they could eat them. Osei also had a great house, and a conclave of the Valar dwelt within. So they brought thousands of pearls for its building. Its floors were of seawater. Its tapestries like the glint of the silver skin of fishes. So he's kind of like Poseidon / Neptune, right? And it was roofed with foam. That's cool. I want a house roofed with foam. Ulmo didn't dwell in Valinor, so he fared back after its building to the outer seas. And he didn't ever really need to live in Valinor, or he would just stop by as Manwë's guest once in a while. Lorien too dwelt far away, and his hall was great and dimly lit, and it had massive gardens. Ole made the place of his dwellings out of mists gathered beyond Arvelon upon the shadowy seas. They were full of labyrinths and mazes, because Palurian had given Lorien a lot of yew trees and cedars and pines that exuded drowsy odors in the dusk, and these hung over deep pools. Glowworms crept around their borders, and then stars were set within their depths. And his sprites sang wonderfully in these gardens with the scent of night flowers, and the songs of sleeping nightingales filled them with great loveliness. Poppies also grew in the dark, the red poppies. They called them the flowers of sleep, and Lorien used them much in his enchantments. There was also a ring of shadowy cypress that towered high above the vat, one of the vats of light. It lay in a bed of pearls, and its surface was unbroken with silver flickerings and the shadows. So it had a silver surface, and then the shadows of the trees lay on it. And the mountains of Valinor could see their faces mirrored there. So you have a silver surface, the shadows of the tree on it, and then you see the reflection of the mountains. Lorien gazed upon it and saw many visions of mystery pass across it. So to me, this is a foreshadowing of Galadriel. It reminds me of Galadriel and her little fountain of water where you look and you see things, and she tells Frodo to look in there. So then we have a person, Tolkien, that's talking about, and another person of the Valar who loved games and bows, boxing, all the sports, wrestling, running, leaping, and songs that go with the swing and a toss of a well-filled cup. Nevertheless, is he no wrangler or striker of blows unprovoked, as is Makar? Albeit there are none of Valar or Uvenamor who are monsters, giants, and ogres, that don't fear the sinews of his arm and his iron-clasped fist when he has cause for wrath. His house was that of mirth and revelry. It sprang high into the air with many stories, at a tower of bronze and pillars of copper in a wide arcade. Men there hung out and rivaled one another in feats of strength. And at times there would be Nessa, the wife of Tolkien. She would bear goblets of the best wine and cooling drinks and pass them out among the players. But the thing she most loved to do was go hang out in a place of fair lawns, which her brother had culled from the riches of all his forest glades. And then it was planted with spells, so the grass was always green and smooth. And she danced with her maidens as long as Laurelland, the tree, was in bloom. And then there was one who dwelt there who played harps and lyres. He'd sit under the trees and play music with an instrument of the bow. And then Emilo would sing joyously while Noldorin played, and he had the best voice. If he wasn't singing to his brother's harp, he'd be trilling in the gardens. The groves of trees they planted, and even upon the foothills of the mountains, have no compare on earth. Beasts reveled there, deer among the trees, herds of kine, cows, basically, among its spaces and wide grasslands. There were bison, horses roaming unharnessed, but they never strayed into the gardens. They were at peace, and they had no fear, for beasts of prey dwelt not among them. Nor did Orome hunt in Valinor. He loves those realms, yet he's very often in the world without. More often than I'll say, and often as Polian, he becomes the greatest, and he does become the greatest of all huntsmen, but he doesn't do it in Valinor. His halls are wide and low, and skins of great richness and price are strewn about on the floor or hung upon the walls, and he has spears and bows and knives. In the midst of each room and hall, a living tree grows, and it holds up the roof. And his bowl is hung with trophies and antlers. Folk in green and brown, there's a noise of boisterous mirth. His wife likes to go be in her gardens, fenced from the wilderlands.